morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another installment of Flyera. Flyera. We have a good one for you guys this week. A lot has happened in the last 2 weeks since our last recording date. Flyers got a new coach. Flyers lost an old coach. Draft lottery happened, and we're not exactly thrilled about the results, and we're going to friggin' rant about that, or just give some respectful opinions. I'll at least rant. But, yeah, the crazy last 2 weeks in Flyerland, but a lot has changed. We're going to be going over it today. We got a good episode for you. Jamey may or may not be joining us. I talked to him off air. He's having a little bit of technical difficulties joining in, so he might be in at some point. But we still got a great show for you today. Joining me right above is one of my two gracious co-hosts. You know him, you love him, Mr. Eric Martino. Eric, how you doing today, brother?
Not too bad, Alex. Not too bad, Alex. It's never a dull day in Flyers land, that's for sure, right? You think we're gonna switch to 2-1 every 2 weeks, and it's just the hits keep on coming. So let's go. We got a lot to talk about.
I even said when we ended last episode 41, that we were gonna find out who our new coach was by the time we had episode 42 run the clock. Funny enough, the episode name is Talk on the Clock. And if you haven't guessed by that, Rick Tocchet is the new coach. And if you heard last week, 2 out of 3 of us weren't exactly thrilled about that. You were probably more willing to give him a chance. I've kind of opened up a little more to the idea now after hearing his interview, but we'll get into that when the time comes. Draft lottery happened quite some time ago now. I think it's been about 12 days. And worst case scenario happened to the Flyers. They dropped to 6. And of course, of all things, the damn New York Islanders jumped from 11 to 1. The Islanders, who had, I think it was like a 3 or 3.5% chance of jumping up. Or were they 10? Were they 10 or 11? I can't remember.
They were 11 and you jumped to 1 because you can only jump 10.
Okay, so it was.
It was just to piss you off. I talked to the NHL. They said it was just to piss Alex off.
I said in our live stream, it was going to be the Penguins or Isles when it was between them, that I was going to lose my crap. And, of course, it was the Isles. It wasn't as much of a crap losing as the Penguins winning it because, of course, that would have been chaotic, and I would have started screaming absurdities at Bettman. But here we are now. Isles ended up getting the first pick. And of all teams, the Utah, now known as the Utah Mammoth, at the time were the Utah hockey team, jumped from 14 to 4. And that means the Flyers have dropped from 4 to 6. Now, mind you, we're not the only team that has dropped. Quite a few teams dropped because of this result. The Preds dropped 2 spots. We dropped 2. The Bruins dropped 2. The Ducks dropped 2. The Penguins dropped 2. The Sabres dropped 2. So we're not the only team. But either way, Flyers dropped from 4 to 6. And it really just shows how important losing that final game against Buffalo was. Because if that game was won in any fashion, we'd be picking 9th today. But we're not. We still have a good selection of picks. Let me give my thoughts on this first. I was obviously upset when they dropped. Because when you watch the draft lottery, I like the actual concept of it. It was cool that they showed the odds in live time and what balls you could win with. There was a lot of people that said they showed some confusion of how it was drawn. I'm going to give a quick explanation of actually how it was for those who were confused. So there was the draft lottery was pretty much like a 50-50 drawing, and everyone got an X amount of tickets out of 1,000 based off where they ended. So the Sharks, for example, had a 25.5% chance getting the number 1 overall pick. Out of 1,000 tickets, that would mean they got 255 50-50 raffle tickets. Then I think, who was it, Chicago originally second, who had a 13.5% chance. That would mean they'd get 135 tickets. So on and so forth. Flyers had 4th best odd. They had a 9.5% chance. That means they got 95 raffle tickets. So in those 95 tickets, they had 95 different number combinations. And as each ball was drawn, they changed the percentage of each team. And what I liked was the NHL sent us a direct link to every single number combination beforehand. So if you're a massive number whiz or analytics whiz about this, you could pretty much do your own basis of, what numbers do we need here? I don't know why I'm holding a deck of cards, speaking of which. What numbers do we need here? And as the numbers came up, the odds consistently went up or down. And then obviously when the final numbers came out, they showed what number combinations we would win with it based off the number that would be drawn. First pick, Flyers had 2 chances of getting the number 1 overall pick. I think if they got numbers 4 or 6, they would have got the first overall pick. And obviously that didn't happen. Isles got it, and they didn't even have a hell of a chance in the second time. They were knocked out on the final number in the second overall pick drawing. And then when that happens, you drop to 6, and here we are. We're looking at the big picture. Who's going to be available? Can the Flyers still land the center of the future that they need or best player available? Because if they jump to one, I think, Eric, me and you can both agree they probably would have went the Matthew Schaefer route, just that true number 1 defenseman. But I was just making more of the bold assumption that they stayed at 4 or dropped to 5 because those are the 2 most likely scenarios. Actually, I think 6 was more likely than 4, unfortunately. But I'm just assuming, that's not going to happen. Of course it did. But yeah, here we are. Now we're at 6. We're looking at this. Who are the guys that would be realistically available? I still think the guy I would love, Anton Frindell, would be available. 2-way forward, hell of a shot, great defensive game, great puck battler around the boards, plays a physical game. The big issue with people have talking about Frindell is he a true center? Because he doesn't have a strong transition game. I still think he is. I think he can develop a little bit stronger of one. And I think if you play him with a good skater / playmaker to be on his wing, it could help eliminate some of those deficiencies. He's, from what I've heard, pretty good in the faceoff dot too. Not that you have to be a true center to be that, because Claude Giroux's moved over to the wing, and he's still arguably the best faceoff guy in the league. But I look at Frindell, I still think it's possible he drops. Elliot Desnoyers has kind of grown on to me more. I think he has a complete 2-way game as well. Very smart player, good shot. Pretty much plays a solid all-around game. He looks like he's a locked-in center. I don't think his ceiling is quite as high as a Frindell, but his floor is much lower, and he's a much safer center pick. And I think he could have the potential still being of a 1C.
Can I say, isn't his name Caleb?
Caleb.
Oh, that's right. We had Elliot Desnoyers.
That's what I thought. Okay, I had to correct you. Sorry.
Caleb Desnoyers. I apologize on that. Thank you for correcting me on that. But Caleb Desnoyers has more of a complete 2C type, shouldn't say complete 2C type of game, but a higher floor, safer pick, more definitive to be a definite center than a Frindell is. And I get his stock has been going up because he had, I guess, a really good overseas tournament recently as well. And then James Higgins was another guy we all pointed to. I don't know how likely it is he's going to drop now. Great skater, great playmaker. There is the BC tie that worries some Flyers with the Cutter Gauthier PTSD. He's a guy that I have some potential interest in. I look at Higgins as pretty much a glove fit for a guy like Michkov or Konechny or Forster, a guy who can be a legitimately good transition center on the rush. And then if you're even considering best available, if you want to go a little off board, maybe Porter Martone's available. I think it's less likely he's there. I think Chicago ends up swooping him, or maybe Utah. We'll see. But he has a really high ceiling as well. Anyway, those are some of the guys I'm interested in. Eric, how about you? What did you think of the lottery, and who are some guys you're interested in?
No, like you said, look, it was really, really, really important for the Flyers to lose that last game against Buffalo, because like we saw exactly what happened in the lottery. Look, we lost both. 2 teams jumped us, so we end up at 6 instead of 4. So yeah, look, like for all those fans that were saying, "Oh, how can you root against the team? How can you root against your own team?" I'm like, listen, I don't for one game of the season, it's all right. You know what? I'm gonna root against my team because exactly for this situation that just happened. Okay, because in the position that we are in the rebuild, where we are in our rebuild, if we would have been picking 8 or 9 in this draft, I don't think that we would have gotten a terrible player, but we wouldn't have got a player that we needed, like a more high end offensive player, or like at least someone who projects to be a first line at worst high end second line player. Because look, now we're at 6, right? So I think that we're gonna get, unless the Flyers go off the board, which I really hope they don't. I think we're gonna get the last of that tier of basically, because like a lot of people think you have the first tier, which is Schaefer and Misa, and then you have your second tier, which is your Martones, your Frundels, your Hagen, and your Desnoyers. Some people might consider Jake O'Brien in that second tier.
Good playmaker.
Yeah, but the more and more people I listen to figure he's more of like top of the third tier.
Yeah.
So like, would it be a reach to take him at 6? Personally, if with who I think is going to be there at 6, if you take O'Brien over them, I think it's a mistake. Not a huge mistake, but still a bit of a mistake. I personally think that it's going to be at 6. It's going to be one of Hagen's or Desnoyers. I feel like obviously we said Misa and Schaefer are going 1-2, depending the order. Honestly, doesn't change anything. I think Martone and Frundell are going 3-4 because, like, look, you have Chicago and you have Utah that are there at 3 and 4. I think they could both use either a center or a winger. And where you have Martone, you can have that big physical guy to play with Bedard, maybe to put him on a line with Bedard. And then Frundell for Utah, it's found money because, okay, if he ends up being a center, great. Maybe we have our 2 center of the future. If he ends up being a winger, great. We got a top or second line winger to play with, either Cooley or, I think now they have Bryn Howden. That's in there's 2 spot. But anyway.
Yeah.
So that's why I think both of those guys will probably go 3-4, and that leaves Desnoyers and Hagen's one of the 2 for us, depending on what Nashville likes. If they like the size more of Desnoyers, or if they like the pure playmaking of Hagen's better, we'll see. I don't know. So I think pretty much, look, we end up with whoever's left. And look, I really like either. Honestly, I'm good with either or, because I really like what I hear about Hagen's and all his playmaking and everything. Size is a bit of an issue, and some pods I've been listening to lately, more on Draft Talk and whatever. A lot of people are thinking that if Hagen's could add a little bit more size to his frame, like add a little more muscle, it'll just completely change his game. Because you have to realize also, right, is with a player like Hagen's going into NCAA, you're playing against guys that are already 20, 21, 22. So you're playing against a bigger competition. And a guy of Hagen's size, like, you're coming there at 18 years old, like, you're still fresh. This was his freshman year.
Yeah,
so
true.
He still needs to bulk up a bit and get a little stronger so that he can compete against an older competition. Whereas you look in the CHL, you're playing against 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Yeah, there's the 19, but like at 20, that's it. You're done in college, in juniors. I think you could have 1 year as an overager, but like the majority of your players are more or less in your age group. So that's why I think like maybe Hagen's numbers were a little lower than people were projecting, just maybe because of his size and because he still has to bulk up a little bit. So, like I said, I'd be good with either or. I'm kind of like, I think it's gonna probably be Desnoyers, and I want to put a little something out there, okay? Something that I've realized since I've been a Flyers fan, okay? I've started following the Flyers in the mid 90s, around like 94, 95. That's when I started really getting into hockey and really starting the Flyers. Started like really getting into the Flyers. Every time the Flyers were really competitive in my lifetime, they've always had a star Québécois, a French-Canadian star on the team. You look at the 90s, like mid to late 90s, you had Eric Desjardins. The Flyers were really good. In the 2000s, they had Simon Gagné. The Flyers were really good. Then in like the late to early 2010s, they had Danny Briere, who they brought in. The Flyers were really good. As soon as Briere started hitting his slide, and he was like pretty much done around the 2014, guess what? The Flyers started to go down. And the Flyers have not had a French Canadian on the team since him. Now, people are going to come at me and say, oh, but what about Claude Giroux and even Sean Couturier? But guess what? Giroux, as much as I love him, he was born in Hearst, Ontario. Sean Couturier was born in Phoenix, Arizona. So,
that's true.
Like, yes, they have Quebecois lineage, but they were not born in Quebec. Who was born in Quebec? Caleb Desnoyers. So, personally, I think Desnoyers should be the pick for this reason alone. Because I think the Flyers need a French-Canadian, at least star player, for us to be good in the future.
Can I throw something in? I've got a regular a viewer and a subscriber on my channel, BL Duff, and he sees Desnoyers in because where he plays it's in the Maritimes a lot. Anyway, he sees him a lot, and he can't rave about him enough.
Honestly,
he wants the Habs to get him. Yeah. The Habs should trade up to get him. So if you get Desnoyers, I think that's a really good pick.
I do too.
I've grown on him. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
No, but like honestly, like more and more I listen, like because now I'm starting to get more because of obviously the draft is coming, so I'm starting to read more. I'm starting to like watch more videos, listen to more podcasts about the upcoming draft, and yeah, look, I really, really like what I'm hearing about Desnoyers, and like a lot of people are saying, like and like you've mentioned also, Alex, they think he is a natural center, like he's the one there. Sure, this kid will be a center.
Yeah.
And from everything that I'm hearing, it's like his floor is really high. It's just that they're not sure what the ceiling is going to be for this kid. So, hey, we'll see. Honestly, like I said, if it's either Higgins or Desnoyers, I am happy as hell. I am happy as hell. But I'm telling you now, I'm saying this right now. If the Flyers pass on either one of those guys and draft Brady Martin, like I've been hearing a lot, I swear I will lose my shit. Like I'm like,
we're gonna be live streaming the draft, by the way. And you saw me lose my shit, everyone, last year when we drafted Jet Luchenko. He grew on to me more, but I was pissed at the time. So trust me, I can relate to you, Eric.
I'm like look, I understand, like, because me too. I was when watching the draft last year, I was not that I was pissed. I was more shocked than pissed. Because at the same time, like Luchenko was like it wouldn't have been that much. It wasn't that much of a reach.
He was like around 20, I think.
Depends where you look. I saw him like more or less in the mid to late teens. So I'm like, yeah, okay, it was a bit of a reach, but it's because you had Zeev that fell. That was more of a shock.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you have this guy Brady Martin, who on most drafts is always like in the 20s or like late 20s. Or like mid, like early to mid 20s, and then this guy's gonna jump all the way to 6 just because he's big and he hits. That I swear, I might be eating my words in 5 years from now, maybe, who knows? But for me, if
we're gonna see Eric grab one of his things behind him and just whip it across the room,
the TV, I swear to God, some things are gonna go flying. If they pass up on skill for a guy, because he's big and he hits, and we think he could be like, no.
I'm going to say this about Brady Martin. I don't want him at 6 either. I agree. I'm not quite as low as you are on him. I think he's probably like a mid to late, probably a mid-teens pick. He kind of has the Tom Wilson type feel to him. And I'm not saying he's going to be a dirty player that's going to start smoking people, but he plays bigger than his size and just is a really physical game that players can really build around too. I'm not picking him at 6. I'd be upset if they got him at 6'2", but I don't think he's a guy I'd consider trading up for in the mid-teens if he was still there. And I don't think he will be personally, but that's just me. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting lottery just in general. I've seen a few interesting names that could potentially go. Brady Martin is one kid. There was one mock I saw with Roger McQueen. No. Keep that injury-riddled history the fuck away from me. He's a guy I'd consider trading up for. But if you're picking him at 6, there's a problem here. And then there was one guy, I don't even remember the guy's name,
Atchison.
Yeah, I saw that mock, and I that's one of my who in the ever-loving fuck is that type of pick. No disrespect to the kid. I just know absolutely nothing about him. I have read nothing on this kid. So
Yeah.
I can't give feedback on him, and I'd be shocked if they did something like that. I don't think they will, but like you said, if it came down to Higgins and Desnoyers for Nashville, Caleb Desnoyers and James Higgins, I think they'd probably go Desnoyers because exactly what type of player Trotz likes. He loves his two-way big centers, and I think that would fit the bill for him. I think a Desnoyers or Frondell, he'd be elated with. I don't think he wants a smaller, speedy center. Obviously, Frondell with the risk of not being a center. But I think, like I said, Caleb Desnoyers has grown on me a little bit. His stock has definitely gone up. You kind of, if we talked 2 or 4 weeks ago, he may have been closer to that third tier, but he's kind of separated from that group and moved himself into the second tier a little bit. He's been a rising stock guy. So I want to see what fans would think of him. Like I said, if they draft him, you got your surefire center. You just got to hope he's a 1C and not a 2 or maybe even 3C. I don't think he'll be a 3C because I've liked a lot more of his offensive game as I've watched over these last few weeks. He's a very smart player. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that stand out to me a lot about his game. So I'd be cool with Desnoyers. I'd be happy with Higgins. I'd be happy with any of those 4 in that second tier, to be honest. Even if Martone were to drop somehow, and I don't think he will. Obviously, he's not a center, but at least he's best player available at that point. And, you know, he kind of reminds you of a Matty Tocc. And that is great to have on your team. So we'll see. But any other thoughts on the draft lottery and potential picks before we move on to the main focus of this episode?
Yeah, just to touch on Atchison for a second. 6 is a bit. It's ridiculous. You can't take him at 6. But I actually really like what I'm hearing and reading about that kid too. Like big defenseman, very good defensively. He's got some speed back there. He's apparently he has a bomb of a shot. So it's a player I would like the Flyers to target. But this again is one of those players that I would like the Flyers to trade up for. And same thing with McQueen. I don't want McQueen at 6. But if you see McQueen sliding, the Flyers this year, where I think the advantage the Flyers have this year is with all the assets that they have, with the 2 other firsts, with the 4 seconds, this is ammunition to trade up to get that player that you really want. So if let's say we get like either the Desnoyers or Higgins at 6, if the McQueen keeps on sliding to like 13, 14, 15, that's when you take one of your first 1 or even 2 seconds, boom, trade up and go get him. And then same thing, even like would I play like Atchison, because I don't see Atchison going past like 15, 16. But if like the Flyers are really enamored with this guy, because you know what, we really need a defenseman with a bomb shot from like that can play from the top. You know what? If that's your guy, again, same thing. Take your other first, package 1 or 2 seconds, and move up and go get him. But again, these are 2 guys that I would not take with 6, but you have the ammunition to do it if you really want to.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one last thing before we move on to the Coach talk, no pun intended. Flyers other picks updates. Colorado's pick is going to be no worse than 23 now. Tonight's game between Toronto and Florida will determine whether it moves up to 22 or not. If Florida wins, the pick moves to 22nd. If Toronto wins, the pick stays at 23. That'll be pretty much locked in at that point. And then the Edmonton pick, with them moving to the Western Conference Finals, that can now be no worse than 29. No better than 29, I should say, unfortunately, because Edmonton's now in the conference finals. So that hurts the value of that pick a little bit. And again, this Toronto-Florida game has some merit on that. If Toronto wins, it can stay at 29. If Florida wins, it can't go past 30th now. If Florida wins, it now is locked into at least 30th, 31st, or 32nd. I'd probably still root for Florida in that case because you need a few things to bend your way if you want Edmonton's first to be at least 29. So I'd rather Colorado's pick get as good as possible. So hopefully Florida wins.
Plus, if you root for Toronto, you get fired here because you can't have it.
Yeah, it's a certain director who's not a Toronto fan here too. Don't forget that. But anyway, let's move on to the Rick Tocchet talk right now. Oh, that's going to be said a lot over the next few years. So, Flyers have their new coach, and his name is Rick Tocchet. We talked about potential coaching opinions last episode. Episode name was Coach of the Day, if you want to check it out. But we had some potential guys that we had ideas that we would like. But for me and Jamey, at least personally, we both wanted to stay away from the Rick Tocchet train. Eric was a little bit higher on him, not quite to the extent that he was his top choice, but he was probably like in the middle of the pack for him, I'd say, give or take. And here we are. He was clearly the Flyers guy from day one. I actually even heard reports if Tocchet was available over John Tortorella a few years ago, he would have been their guy over Torts, to be honest with you. But it's now been finalized. They had their press conference Friday. Eric, let me start you with this one. What do you think of Rick Tocchet? Yay, nay, or nay?
No, for me it's a yay. Like I honestly, like I've said previously, I don't mind Rick Tocchet. I think he's a good coach. My whole thing is because I don't think the Flyers are like super ready to compete like at the moment. I think they still need 1 or 2 years of rebuilding, at least one. And I thought maybe someone like Freshweiler, a Mitch Love, someone a little younger, someone that has more experience with younger players would be more of an ideal fit. Someone who could grow with the team, someone like even just closer in age, because Tocchet is like 61, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So, and like guys like Freshweiler and Mitch Love, they're they're in their 40s, so they're a bit closer in age, and it's like, so I figured like someone like that would be better for the Flyers. But look, at the end of the day, they gave Tocchet a 5-year contract. So I think, and from what I gathered from the press conference, is that Tocchet understands the situation right now, that it's probably going to be a 1 to 2 years of the continuing to like rebuild and shape the team, and then take off. So like, look, I can't, like, if you look at his track record, especially like he's dealt with a lot of young players too in his career. Like, look at his time in Arizona. He had a lot of young players, like Clayton Keller. Like, look, just this was Clayton Keller was a young player, like just busting into the league. What's his name? Nick Schultz was a super young player when he was in Arizona. Like, you have, and so he's dealt with like young players before. And like, look, is he a good teacher? Like, seemingly from everything I've been hearing, like, yeah, like players, and plus also players love him. So like, how can I, like, if you're getting endorsed by Crosby, by Quinn Hughes, by all these guys, like, I'm sorry, like, I'll take their word for it. Like, like, so if they say he's a good coach, then hey, you know what? Good. So, and again, like, also what I like about Tocchet is all stuff that I've heard is, like, again, he could be that player's coach where he has open communication and he's a teacher, but at the same time, he's also no bullshit. Yeah. Like, he's like, if there's something he has to tell you something, he's going to tell you something. And if he has to be stern, he's going to be stern. And that's one thing I really wanted from our next coach too, is like, not somebody that's going to be a pushover, not that super nice guy that's like, it's going to become a country club again. So that's honestly, that's one aspect that I really like about Tocchet, and which I think he would do real good for the team. And also, now again, he's the head coach, but he was coaching the power play when he was in Pittsburgh. That was his assignment. And again, like, you're like, okay, well, you know what? Fucking Pittsburgh with Malkin and Crosby and Letang and whatever. Like, yeah, of course they're gonna have good power plays, because But look, with the Coyotes, again, he was the head coach, so he had to, transfer his duties. But still, those teams that were god awful, well, not god awful, but they should never have done what they did under him, because they made the playoffs 1 year and they were close to a second year. So But just to say, in 1920, they had a 19.16% power play. In 2021, they had a 20.79% power play. And this is a bad Coyotes team, okay? With Vancouver, last year, they had a 22.52% power play. This year they had a 22.52 power play. Last year, they had a 22.57 power play. So his team's power plays are usually pretty high up there. Like they got some pretty decent power plays. So regardless whether he's the head coach or assistant coach, like maybe he puts in his input, or at least he'll find the right guy to run the right system on the power play. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, if those Coyotes teams could have power plays in the 20s or close to 20 with the talent they had, and with the talent that we have, we can't crack fucking 14%. Like come on. Come on. So, you know what? It's an advantage I see. And you know what? Hopefully, if he could turn it around, man, great.
I've got to interject here. Let me interject for a sec. If you're out there watching this show and you're enjoying it, please give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And my opinion on Rick Tocchet hire, I think was a good hire for you guys. That's my opinion.
Fair enough. So I'll say this. I was in the glass half empty group when it came to Tocchet. I didn't want another Torts-esque coach because one of the big fears I had is I wanted them to get a coach that was a little more offensively driven. And you just made some good points, Eric, how his power plays have been solid. I was actually going to point that out as well. Ever since dating back to his Pittsburgh days as an assistant, Arizona, Vancouver, he's always consistently had a good power play. And that's probably one of the big things that drew Danny here. One of the things he mentioned, actually, is how he kind of elevated those Arizona teams. He mentioned that in his press conference, actually. He didn't directly point to the fact that he won a Jack Adams 2 years ago. Because, yeah, that's incredible. You win Coach of the Year 2 years ago. He's got that on his resume. One thing I point to is so did the last two Flyers coaches. They both won Jack Adams. Not to take anything away from it. It's an incredible award. But I wouldn't hold that as high of a standard to pretty much evaluating a coach as to what they have done for me through the numbers and statistically and analytically. One of the big knockoffs I had on Tocchet is you look at his playoff resume. He's been a head coach for 9 years. 7 of them they've missed playoffs. He's won a total of 1 round in his career. And that was one of the big talking points I had that scared me. The 1 round he won was 2 years ago in Vancouver. I think they beat Nashville in the first round, if I remember correctly, while losing to Edmonton. I think they lose in 7 games?
7. Yeah, he took Edmonton to 7, who lost in 7.
It was a good season for him. All the credit to Vancouver. That was one of the surprises of the league 2 years ago. And before the wheels completely fell off, turned into a tire fire and exploded this year. Not that I put all of it on Tocchet. In fact, I'd probably say he's one of the few guys that don't get a lot of blame. Like the upper management was a disaster. There was the Pedersen-Miller mess. Now obviously the higher-ups talk about Quentin Hughes freely moving potentially and talking about bringing up the Hughes brothers in New Jersey, which is a massive no-no, by the way. I was quite surprised they didn't get a phone call from the league about that, but that's besides the point. But Tocchet was one of the few guys that didn't seem like he got a lot of crap. And, at the time I was worried about, hey, he was part of that Vancouver tire fire. But the more I kind of read into it, wasn't really a guy that got a lot of shit out of it. And Eric, one thing you mentioned that's interesting to me too is how much praise he's gotten around the league. And that is true. Travis Sanheim told us he had dinner with Sidney Crosby the other night. And as you mentioned, Crosby had nothing but good things to say about Tocchet. And one of the best players, if arguably maybe the best player of our generation, has that type of praise for the head coach he just hired. Even if it is a division rival, that's a plus, in my opinion. And another thing that Danny mentioned that really stood out to me is the potential ability to bring in talent from the outside over here, whether it be free agents or trades. He said he's already gotten agents making phone calls to him. And that's big. Because one of the issues with the Flyers over the last 5 years is making them an attractive destination. Now, mind you, a head coach only can do so much in that. But having a head coach that a lot of people want to play under is definitely a major positive. One of the big issues potentially with John Tortorella was people pointing to the fact that a select group of players would potentially not want to come over here and play with him because of how they felt towards the coach. Now, there's a select guys who love Tocc that will always say good things about him. I mean, you heard Eric Johnson talk about him after he left when he went back to Colorado. Cam Atkinson had nothing but good things to say about him. Obviously Mitch Koff at the end of the year, he raved about how much he enjoyed playing under Tocc, which is one of the things that were criticized about Tocc is potentially about how he handled Mitch Koff. And then when you look at Tocchet, people think he's kind of a Tocc light, non-bullshit guy who isn't going to put up with your shit, but isn't quite as much of a hard ass. Like he's a player's coach. Players can relate to him. He wants you to bust his ass every night, but at the same time, he's willing to talk to you. And, that's in a way a good thing, but he's always been more of a defensive style of coach. So one of the big things I worried about, especially when it came to Matvei Michkov and potentially unlocking him, is would you be able to get the most out of him with a guy like Tocchet who kind of plays more of a defensive first style of game? And a lot of people that pointed out said he was a lot of a dump and chase type guy. A few people came into my comments and kind of brought that up to my attention, says he doesn't play as much of a dump and chase as led on. And I'm like, okay. So I kind of went to review some of his games a little bit. And, it might be a little overblown. He might not be as much of a dump and chase artist as I first thought. But again, the big key to me is unlocking Matvei Michkov, and hearing his talk in that press conference makes me believe he might give Michkov a little more of that offensive freedom that he had under Brad Shaw, who, mind you, we'll be talking about a little while as well. But he'll give Michkov some of the offensive freedom, and that was one of the big keys to me when it came to Rick Tocchet, is you need to have a coach that's going to be able to talk with Matvei and pretty much say, listen, I want you to score. I don't want you to have that no bullshit type of mentality. Now, at the end of the day, actions speak louder than words. I want to see how Matvei takes another step this year. 63-point campaign, despite 2 healthy scratches, a few benchings, middle 6 at best consistent minutes until Tocc was gone. Enough good things can't be said about his season, especially when you had the 30th ranked power play that was barely hovering around 14%. And he did all that. So by default, your power play should be better. And I trust that Tocchet is going to be bringing a better power play coach here. I don't know who it's going to be yet. There's been talk about Luke Richardson coming onto the staff. I think he'll be probably more on the defensive end of the side. Now that Brad Shaw's gone, again, we'll be talking about him shortly. But who is going to be the power play coach? That's going to be almost as important of a hire as the head coach itself, because this power play can't be this bad again. And, Rocky Thompson's gone. You can't use that crap anymore. You need to find a coach that's going to help develop that. And I'm glad they made the decision to get rid of him. But who Rick Tocchet picks as his power play coach is going to be massive in terms of determining what he does here long term. But I will say that Tocchet press conference made me grow on him a little. He still isn't my first choice. I still would have preferred Ferschweiler. I still would have preferred Jay Woodcroft. I thought maybe a little bit. I kind of put Mitch Love in the same category as a Tocchet. I think he's probably going to end up in Pittsburgh personally. But the 2 guys I named, Ferschweiler and Woodcroft, probably would have been my first 2 choices. I would have been elated with either one of them. But Tocchet's press conference had me feeling a little more optimism than I first had about him at first. It's good. You can say the right things in the press conference, though, but as I just stated, actions speak louder than words. I want to see how this offensive scheme performs under him, because this team needs to be able to not freelance a little bit, but be more free to be more of an aggressive team in the offensive end. And I want to see Michkov take the next step. I want to see Konechny continue to have good seasons. I want to see Forster, who has had a fantastic World Juniors. He has been sensational. He's getting national media attention. This kid, I have been so high on him. I just want to take a quick minute on this real quick. You better not give him a bridge contract. I want a long-term deal for Tyson. I don't care anymore. I don't care about Joel therapy PTSD. You lock this kid up long-term, or you could have a team try to potentially offer sheet him. Don't fuck around with Tyson. Give him a long-term deal. But anyway, I want to see guys like Tyson take the next step. I want to see guys like Owen Tippett potentially rebound if he's still here. What more can you get out of the Bobby Brinks and Noah Cates of the world? There's going to be a lot of questions to answer. But one thing I will say, I feel a little more comfortable about it from an outside perspective looking in, because there's been a lot of players, as you mentioned, the Sidney Crosbys and Quinn Hughes of the world, that have had nothing but good things to say about him. And just to potentially see where things go at the end of the day in bringing in outside talent. I think it's pretty apparent they're going to be a little more aggressive this offseason. I don't want an all-hands-on-deck type offseason like you had in 2007, but I wouldn't mind getting a legit top 6 center to add to this team and a good goalie. Those are the two big adds I expect them to make this offseason. What they do, I don't know. Marco Rossi's name has been dangled a lot. Mason McTavish has been dangled a lot. We'll kind of go a little more into some of these potential names as we get closer to the draft and as the offseason gets a little closer to June. Maybe even next week's episode, we'll be talking about that a little bit. But Flyers got their coach. Looks like they feel comfortable about it. That's the guy they wanted from day one. I'm a little bit higher than I was, as I mentioned, but it's still not my number one choice. But Eric, any final thoughts before we move on to Brad Shaw?
Yeah, just quick. I don't know if Tocchet did this like subconsciously or whatever, but like during the press conference, he mentioned the practice facility a lot. Like it came up like 2 to 3 times. And one of the big things I heard about him in Vancouver was that he didn't like the fact that Vancouver didn't have a practice facility. And it was just funny that I don't know. I think it was that's it. It was like 2, 3 times that he brought up this great environment, the great building, the practice facility, and the practice facility. Like, are these like little shots to the Achilles? Huh?
Is Vancouver that much of a mess right now?
I don't know, but it felt like these are just little jabs at the Aquilini.
Arizona. In Arizona, you didn't have a practice facility, I bet.
Arizona didn't even have an arena.
Yeah.
Right, so.
No, but it was just funny because, like, but Arizona's Arizona. That's one thing. But, like, the Vancouver Canucks, like.
That's a hockey. I mean, that's a big hockey. It's surprising. I have no ill will on Vancouver.
I just found it really funny that, like, it came up a few times.
Yeah, there's going to be a few jabs like that along the way. He had a lot of praise for Elias Pettersson too in that press conference too. That was another thing I noticed. He gave him a few pats on the back, talking how much he enjoyed his playing with Pettersson as a player and how much he enjoyed Quinn Hughes. Didn't say much about JT Miller though. That was a little interesting, I felt. But anyway, moving on. Brad Shaw, unfortunately, was a casualty out of this. Sounds like it was a mutual decision. Unfortunately, he will not be back with the Flyers staff next year. They gave him time that if he wanted to come back, he would. But I kind of understood his, stance on it. That after you were a head coach for those handful of games, even if it was an interim. And then to go back to the potential defensive guy, it would kind of be a little awkward to now be looking up to a new boss after you were the boss for a couple games and getting a taste of it. And, it kind of stinks. I like Shaw. It's a little unfortunate. I wish him the best no matter what. I have nothing but good things to say about Brad Shaw. But anyway, before I go a little more into it, Eric, let me let you start on this one. What is your take on the news? What do you think of Brad Shaw as a coach? And just overall, your take on this?
Yeah, no, look, it's really sad. Honestly, he did so many good things here. Like even though this year the PK took a little bit of a step back, but like usually we always had a step back. But it ended up being still in the mid-teens or something or whatever it was. But the PK, he ran it so well, and like a couple years ago we had I don't know how many freaking shorthanded goals. And that plus like what he did to the defense, like he turned around Risto's game. You saw Drysdale making strides. Sanheim took strides. Even Zamula last year, towards the end of the season, was playing a lot better. Not still, granted, still Zamula, but at the end of the day, like he did start taking some strides. And like Cam York, like this year, Cam York struggled, but I think it had more to do with injury and whatever. But like the year before, look, Cam York was probably the Flyers' best defenseman. So like all the work he's done with this defense and everything is, you can't turn a blind eye to it. Like he did such a good job. And at the end of the day, I think it was more like, I think he was the runner up for the head coach. Like if it wasn't gonna be Tocchet, I felt like the way everything was sounding, it felt like it was gonna be Shaw. They were gonna give him a shot at it. And at one point it sounded like Tocchet was out, like he was going back to like TV or whatever, or I don't know if
they said that last week. It's funny too how quick things change.
I think like Friedman had reported at one point that like don't be shocked if he stays in TV for a year or something.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that I've like little like reading here and there, it just sounds like basically Tocchet's camp was just trying to get more money. So it's like, oh, I can just stay in TV for a year. Like this is my price. You match it or I'm going to TV. So I think maybe it felt like maybe Shaw thought that he had the job. It's like, oh, okay, well, he's not coming, so it's my job. And then like when the Flyers finally matched Tocchet's price and they hired him and everything, I think maybe that was like that last like, oh, fuck, like I thought I had the job. Now it feels more like, because if they would have hired Tocchet like straight up, I'm like, maybe Shaw would have been like, okay, you know what, like fine, I'll stay and I'll work with the team.
The hope of it, yeah.
Maybe just that like false hope that he had for a little bit kind of soured him, and it's like, you know what, I think I just want to, pursue my career elsewhere, and we'll see what happens. And look, there's a bunch of jobs that are open, so he could find a head. Maybe, I don't know, like I haven't heard that he interviewed anywhere this year. Like I know last year, I think in Anaheim, or I know he interviewed somewhere last off season. I can't remember where, but anyway. So maybe he feels like there's an opportunity elsewhere. So look, at the end of the day, like he did such a great job here, and like you said, I wish him the best. Like I hope he finds somewhere, he lands on his feet somewhere, and hopefully as a head coach.
Yeah, I like Bradshaw a lot. It's unfortunate that it ended this way. I was still advocating him to be part of Tocchet's group. I wanted him to stay. As you mentioned, he did such good work at Rasmus Ristolainen, who was such a raw mess in Buffalo. Turns him around here to be a competent top four defenseman. Mind you, he can't stay healthy, but still a competent top four defenseman nonetheless. Jamey Drysdale being another example, raw talent, had a rough year in 2023-24. First half of this year, Jamey mentioned that he was recovering from the core muscle surgery and that he wouldn't be around right till January. And then he kind of started making strides around January. Probably was their best defenseman in the second half of the year. Obviously, Travis Sanheim stabling into a true number two defenseman. It is unfortunate because he did a lot of good here. And, they were the shorthanded kings with their penalty kill in 2023-24. They had 16 shorthanded goals. You knew that was going to progress. But they were a top 5 PK the whole year. I mean, this year, they weren't quite as good on the PK. They were middle of the pack all year, maybe even the lower half of the middle of the pack. But still, you were never really pointing fingers like, oh, Shaw's doing terrible with this PK. No, I mean, you're still middle of the pack. You can't get too upset about that. Like, the team vastly overachieved on the penalty kill. The penalty kill was more productive than the damn power play 2 years ago. And, Brad, he was such a good dude, such a class act here. He will always, he was throwing, and one thing that I point out too, he was thrown out into so many random press conferences at the end of the games when Torts wasn't talking, and he would pick up the slack and say all the right things, little things like that. I remember too. Like he is such a good dude. Wherever he ends up, I hope he succeeds because he was one of the few bright spots in this coaching staff this year. I liked Torts his first 2 years here, but this year I mentioned it multiple times. I think it was by far his worst year as a coach here. and then the wheels kind of came off. But Shaw kind of stabilized things, at least defensively. He was still playing well. The goaltending was a mess, but you never really pointed to defensive structure. You pointed that, oh my God, this goalie should have had this constantly. So guys on the defensive end, for the most part, were usually in the right position. I mean, you can't be 100% in that. And, even guys like, Emil Andre, when he played here the first half of the year, he showed some sparks. I think the second half was a little bit different. He was a little bit out of tune. I still believe in him to a lesser extent. As you mentioned, Zamula in the late half of the season, he looked a little bit better for Igor Zamula's standards, we should say, at least. Nick Seeler, that's another guy we don't talk about.
Yeah.
Nick Seeler, what he did with him, he was a journeyman in the NHL. He was with the Minnesota Wild, completely left the league for a little bit. He comes here, he stabilizes on that D-corps and he earns himself a 4-year contract. If you want to talk about a guy that was a project guy that he did and turned into pretty much a legitimate shot blocking machine, stay-at-home defenseman, number 4, number 5, probably more of a number 5, but you could even argue a number 4 on some teams' defenseman. Nick Seeler, man, what he did with him and what happened with Nick Seeler's career, I think that's one guy that doesn't get talked about enough, about how he's turned his game around since Bradshaw was here. Props to him. Props to Bradshaw, what he did with all these defensemen. Not to sound like a broken record, but whatever's next for him, whether it's a head coaching gig, which could happen. There's a few jobs out there. Seattle, Pittsburgh, Boston, all still open right now. Sounds like, I'm not going to say Chicago. It sounds like Jeff Blashill seems like he's going to go there. I don't know how I feel about that for the Blackhawks. Yeesh. But not to go too off topic. But yeah, Brad, thank you for everything. Wherever you end up next, I hope you continue to kick ass and spread your defensive wisdom no matter what. But any other final thoughts on Bradshaw before we wrap this up?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah, and we will never see the power kill again like it was in 2023-24. Rest in peace, power kill. You were great while you were here.
Hey, you never know. Eh? We still got some of these players. Like, look, Luchenko's coming. He's got that speed. He's definitely playing on the power. He's gonna definitely play on the penalty kill. So
yeah,
who knows? We might have version 2.0.
He was great on the kill. I mean, I know Lawton's gone, but Noah Cage should be able to fill that role pretty well. So we'll see.
If I'm not mistaken, in the World Juniors this year, he had a shorthanded goal.
He did? Oh, yeah, that's true.
So, just saying.
Something to keep an eye on. But, yeah, any final thoughts, Eric, before we wrap things up this week?
My final thought? No, just like watching the playoffs, and they've been great so far this year. I think this year's playoffs have been amazing. So hopefully, like the Flyers, if we can turn this ship around, man, in a year or two, that like we could actually be participating in what's going on right now, So
fingers crossed, man. Maybe we will after this offseason. I think they're going to take a massive step forward this year. The question will be, will the step be big enough to get in? We'll see. But I will say, I am rooting for Florida tonight to help that Colorado pick. We got 6-23 right now. Hopefully 23 becomes 22. Every pick helps to try to entice any potential move-ups. So we'll see there. But, yeah, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Let us know what you think in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe. Give us any feedback if there's any topics you want to talk about potentially in future episodes. Next week, we'll probably be talking about, some potential trade talk or some free agency talk. And obviously the draft. The draft is only a little over a month away. So that's coming right around the corner. We're recording this on May 18th. The draft is June 27th. So about roughly 40 days away. So definitely something to keep an eye on. But maybe a move's made over the next 2 weeks. Maybe there's some breaking news for the Flyers that we can talk about. Usually you don't see it till June. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's more maybe episode 44 that move potentially happens. But we'll see. But crazy crap's happen. But with all that being said, thank you all for tuning in. You have a great week, everyone. Again, like, comment, subscribe. Tell us what you think in the comments. If there's potentially some feedback you want to give for future episodes, let us know. But thank you all for tuning in. And as always, take care. We'll see you in 2 weeks. And as always, let's go Flyers.